So it's another beautiful day on the battle for Azeroth Beta, and today we're taking a look at the Unholy DK. They've been polished a lot going into BFA, better AoE, smoother rotation, and a few of our traits have been added into our base toolkit and talents. So I'll be going over most of the major changes to our base toolkit, talents, and give you my thoughts on the current gameplay. So let's start off with the base stuff. Summon Gargoyle is no longer baseline, it is now a talent instead, which I will go over a bit more on later. Following that trend, Wraith Walk is gone and replaced by Death's Advance. 45-second cooldown lasts for 8 seconds and your movement speed is increased by 30% and you cannot be slowed below 100% of your normal speed. On top of this, you are immune to forced movement effects and knockbacks. There's also a passive part of it. You cannot be slowed below 70% of your normal speed, and that's at all time. However, Wraith Walk is a talent now. Bit sad that it's not baseline, but hey, what you gonna do? Moving on, Army of the Dead is on a 8-minute cooldown instead of 10, which is pretty damn nice. Means you can use it more than once during some encounters. Death Coil costs 40 runic power now instead of 45, and it also reduces cooldown of Dark Transformation by 1 second, which is just an awesome change in my opinion. And our dear old Festering strike, it now inflicts 2 to 3 wounds instead of 2 to 4 wounds, and Festering wounds cap out at 6 stacks instead of 8 stacks now. Our mastery has been changed to only work with our shadow damage abilities instead of just pure shadow damage. Nothing too noticeable, but I assume this is so that trinkets that deal shadow damage don't get out of hand. Apocalypse, our old artifact power, is now baseline. Rejoice! On a 1.5 minute cooldown, you bring doom upon the enemy, dealing X amount of damage and bursting up to 4 festering wounds on your target. Summon an army of the dead ghoul for each wound that you burst, and they last for 15 seconds. Works pretty much the same as in Legion, but it's nice that we didn't lose this going into BFA. And that's pretty much the major changes to our base toolkit. So let's go over to the talent side of things. Starting off with the 56 row, we have Infected Claws, All Will Serve, and Clawing Shadows. Infected Claws, your Ghoul's Claw attack has a 30% chance to cause a Festering wound on the target. Less time spent spamming Festering Strike and more time spent spamming Scourge Strike. Works very well on multiple targets as well due to Dark Transformation, which transforms Claw into an AoE or cleave if you will, so you're able to get those wounds up on multiple targets a lot faster. And All Will Serve, your Raise Dead spell summons an additional skeletal minion, so an extra minion that you can't control, it just swings away a bit. Clawing Shadows replaces your Scourge Strike. It costs 1 rune, deals X amount of shadow damage, and causes 1 festering wound to burst. It also has a 30-yard range, so does a bit more damage than Scourge Strike, and due to it being 100% shadow damage, it scales better with our mastery. And having a ranged spender is pretty handy from time to time. However, I would go for Infected Claws most of the time. The extra festering wounds is really nice to have, and the fact that your ghoul cleaves during Dark Transformation is just awesome, so you can get wounds up on multiple targets. Moving on! 57, Bursting Source, Ebon Fever, and Unholy Blight. Bursting Source, Festering Wounds deals 25% more damage when they burst, and all enemies within 8 yards of a burst suffer X amount of damage, so it pretty much turns your single target Boil Popper into an AoE. Works very well with Infected Claws due to being able to get more wounds out on more targets. And Ebon Fever, Virulent Plague, deals 15% more damage over time in half the duration. So it lasts for a shorter duration but deals a lot more damage during it. Really good for both AoE and single target. Unholy Blight, on a 45-second cooldown, costs 1 rune and you surround yourself with a swarm of insects. Lasts for 6 seconds and you inflict an unholy disease on all nearby enemies that deals X amount of damage over 14 seconds. Even more AoEs for the AoE row. It is just a nice dot that you can get up on loads of targets. Fairly bursty damage as well. I'd go Bursting Source for heavy AoE fights or dungeons, and Ebon Fever for pure single target. But I have seen some peeps using Unholy Blight for single target as well, but I guess we'll see when all the tuning is done. And then there's the 58 row. We have Grip of the Dead, Death's Reach, and Asphyxiate. Taking a look at Grip of the Dead. Death and Decay reduces movement speed by 90% and it decays by 10% per second. I mean, it's just a crazy amount of movement reduction. It will be really good for Mythic Plus. And Death's Reach increases the range of Death Grip by 10 yards, and killing an enemy that yields experience or honor resets the cooldown of Death Grip. It's great for solo content and to some extent for dungeons. Extra range is always nice, and the increase in crowd control you get from it resetting can be very valuable during dungeons. And then there's the old Asphyxiate. 45-second cooldown, 20-yard range. You lift the target Darth Vader style and stun them for 4 seconds. Just a plain and simple single target stun. This row largely depends on content. For dungeons, I'd say 90% of the time go Grip of the Dead, and solo content Death's Reach. But they all have their uses. And the 60s row, Pestilent, Postules, Harbinger of Doom, and Soul Reaper. And the Pestilent Postules. Bursting a Festering wound has a 10% chance to grant you Runic Corruption, which is 100% increased rune regeneration for 3 seconds. Adds a bit of a faster pace to our overall rotation, speeding up our rune reg every now and then. And Harbinger of Doom. Sudden Doom triggers 15% more often, and you can have 2 charges of Sudden Doom. Get more of those tasty free death coils and have more control over them. Due to being able to store charges, no need to instantly fire it off due to fear of overcapping. And Soul Reaper. 45-second cooldown, rip out an enemy's soul, dealing X amount of shadow damage over 8 seconds. If the enemy dies while afflicted by it, you gain 10% haste for 8 seconds. And it also generates 2 runes. Again, very good for solo content where you can reliably proc the 10% haste. It still works very well on single target and in dungeons. In dungeons you can still reliably proc the 10% haste all the time, and for single target it still does a lot of damage and you still get the 2 runes. And for this row, I'd probably go for Pestilent Postules. Just getting more runic corruptions is very nice. It helps out with smoothing your overall rotation a lot. Moving on, 75, Spell Eater, Wraith Walk, and Death Pact. Taking a look at Spell Eater, Anti-Magic Shell absorbs 30% more magic damage and lasts 5 seconds longer. Not much to say here, heavy magic encounters, go, go, go. Wraith Walk is Wraith Walk. 1 minute cooldown increases your movement speed by 70% for 4 seconds. Taking any action will cancel this, and while active your movement speed cannot be reduced below 170%. So if you're in the need for speed, go Wraith Walk. And Death Pact. 2 minute cooldown heals you for 50% of your maximum HP, but it absorbs healing equal to 30% of your max HP for 15 seconds. It is just an insane amount of healing from this one. Bit of a risk reward with the healing absorb, but in a dungeon or raid that's usually not an issue. As for this row, again, depends on what content you're running. For progression rating, I'd say Death Pact is the clear winner, but Wraith Walk definitely has its places and uses. And the 90s row, we have Pestilence, Defile, and Epidemic. So, Pestilence, your Death Decay damage has a 10% chance to apply a Festering wound. Pretty crazy on both single target and AoE, but especially on AoE. While you're in your Death Decay, your Scourge Strike hits all enemies near your target, meaning you will burst every wound on every target. Combine that with Bursting Source, and you got yourself some pretty insane burst AoE during Death and Decay. And Defile replaces Death and Decay, 20-sec cooldown, costs 1 rune. It's your wannabe Lich King Death and Decay. You defile the target ground, dealing X shadow damage to all enemies over 10 seconds. And just as Defile, while you remain in Defile, your Scourge Strike hits all enemies near your target, and if any enemy stands in your Defile, it grows in size every second. Does a ton of damage both on single target and AoE, but it falls pretty flat compared to the other talents in this row. It's closer now than before, but still not close enough, which is a damn shame in my opinion. It looks so good. It should be baseline for at least one of the Death Knight specs, to be honest. If that was the case, then they could just give Unholy another talent. And Blood DK or Unholy DK could have Defile as baseline, then you'd always get to see that tasty visual. Moving on, we have Epidemic. Costs 30 runic power, causes each of your virulent plagues to flare up, dealing X amount of damage to the infected enemies and an additional X amount of damage to all other enemies near them. It is just so damn good on AoE. Just replace your Death Coil spam with Epidemic while AoEing and just go ham on them. There's been a lot of back and forth on this row as to what will be the go-to talent, so to speak. Both Pestilence and Epidemic works great. I personally like Pestilence more in conjunction with Bursting Swords, both for AoE and single target, but if you don't use Bursting Swords, I'd say Epidemic, at least for pure AoE and dungeons. And the last row, 100s. Army of the Damned, Unholy Frenzy, and Summon Gargoyle. Army of the Damned, our old set bonus. Death Coil reduces the cooldown of Apocalypse by 1 additional second and Army of the Dead by 5 seconds. This is just an awesome talent. In my opinion, I just love being able to use Apocalypse and Army more often. Not to mention that those two spells does an absolute shit ton of damage. And Unholy Frenzy on a 1.3 minute cooldown increases your haste by 20% and your auto attacks inflicts festering wounds. So a mini bloodlust with the added bonus of being riddled with diseases. During this you can pretty much lay Festering Strike to rest and spam those Scourge Strikes. And last out is our dear old Summon Gargoyle. On a 3-minute cooldown, you summon a Gargoyle into the area to bombard your target. Your Gargoyle gain 1% increased damage per every 2 runic power you spend, so every Death Coil gives it 20% damage increase. It's up for 30 seconds, and you want to spam as many runic power spenders as you can during those 30 seconds to be able to get as much damage as possible out during that window. I was never a fan of the Gargoyle playstyle. Sure, it has crazy burst potential, but that's about it. Some people love it, I just don't. And for anyone who would miss the Valkyrie from Legion, you can change your Gargoyle into one in your class hall, or whatever you want to call it in Battle for Azeroth. So for this row, I'd say either Army of the Damned or Unholy Frenzy. Army of the Damned is very easy to use and is very good on single target. Unholy Frenzy is a bit more tricky to get the full effect out of, but it is really good on both single target and on AoE. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this look at the Unholy Death Knight going into BFA. All in all, they feel really solid, better than they did in Legion in my opinion, and I played them quite a lot during farm raids just for the fun of it. The AoE feels a lot more solid this time around. Sure, it still has its ramp up time, which is annoying if you're doing easy content due to packs pretty much dying before you can really get into the AoE. But it is less of a ramp up now and it hits a lot harder. The single target rotation feels a lot smoother and our rework talents play a lot better. The only negative thing I have about them is that they're slow paced, and again, that's a personal opinion. A lot of people like that. I just don't find it that much fun to auto swing for a couple of seconds while I wait for my runes, but that's just me. Do you guys have any thoughts on the current Unholy Death Knight? Let me know in the comments below, and if you have any questions at all, make sure to hit me up in the comments. I try to answer any and all questions as well as I can. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave me a like, and ring that notification bell and switch it to all. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.